I'm not sure how I got here. Has to do with Spider-Man, I think.
Hey, welcome back to ScreenCrush. I'm Ryan Airy, and Sony needs to stop. Please stop. This is not working.
I can't take it anymore.
Today, we're going to talk about Venom the Last Dance. I actually enjoyed the movie at times because, it was so bad. But guys, come on. The whole Spider-Man without Spider-Man franchise experiment, it just has to stop. I will explain why and how this movie absolutely wasted Null and is dishonest to fans of this character. They lied to us, and I am not happy. A little later, I'm going to talk to Spider-Man expert Matt Singer to get his thoughts on the film. But first, let me explain why it's hard to see this movie as anything but a failure. So, when I say this movie failed, let me clarify what I mean. As a piece of franchise building or a comic book movie adaptation, the movie sucks. It's borderline insulting to real Marvel fans, but it's not like it's not entertaining. I mean, it made me laugh because at times it was high camp. Like, here's an early example in the film. There's like a very early scene where, it's in the trailer, so it's not really a spoiler, where Eddie meets this Mexican gang that has been like using dogs for dogfighting. And instead of just like trying to kill Eddie right away, they talk to him for like 2 minutes about the darkness within. It is like a ridiculous scene, but it's so bad, it's good. The movie is like a road trip film where you get to see Eddie and Venom in like different weird circumstances, and when that happens, it works. Every time Eddie and Venom are together, it is an incredible performance from Tom Hardy playing both sides of the conversation. I mean, if you don't know, Tom Hardy performs Venom with an earpiece of his recording in his head, so he is reacting live to himself on screen.
We are Venom! No. Yeah, we are Venom.
But then, when the movie cuts to the scientists at Area 55, it gets so boring.
Are you yawning in the middle of this while I'm breaking it down?
Like, Juno Temple plays this scientist, right? And her character is introduced with this nightmare from her childhood that teases a really haunting backstory. But honestly, that backstory or her appears so little in the film, it felt more like the shop teacher storyline in South Park.
Oh, Richard is beautiful. Yes.
But I will say, there is a montage at the end where Eddie is reflecting on his past with Venom, and it's genuinely hilarious because it is so out of place and attempts to be sappy. Like, in the montage, he's remembering moments that occurred just a few minutes earlier in the film, and that really made me laugh. So I don't fully hate this movie or this franchise. I mean, I love the character of Venom, and especially the Venom horse. And that is why we designed these Venom parody shirts at our merch store. We have My Little Symbiote, Bully Parker, Dirty Dancing, and my favorite, Denim. The links for those are below. So while the movie is like dumb and fun in parts, at times I think these people misunderstand the Venom franchise. Like, this is not a series of movies that ever made me care about the character of Eddie Brock.
Oh, right. Well, that is good to know.
I mean, I thought the first movie was incredibly boring until the pair of them finally bonded and we hear this line.
On my planet, I am kind of a loser, like you.
So that set up this messed up buddy cop dynamic in the first film, which then became the story of two fussy bachelors in part 2.
Get out! Take your stuff! Get out!
This is my house!
This film tries to be sentimental and sweet, but it just doesn't work because we've never seen that side of these characters. Eddie hates the Venom symbiote, he always has. But this movie, like Madam Web and Morbius, this feels like a movie that was made by committee that's more interested in playing studio politics than telling an actual story. What do you mean by that? Well, everyone knows that Sony tried to set up their own cinematic universe of Spider-Man characters with Amazing Spider-Man 2, but they crammed so much on that movie that it sank at the box office. So Sony decided to essentially lease the character back to Marvel Studios. But instead of just letting Marvel Studios make money for them, Sony still tried to set up a villain-verse with Venom as the star. Now, the first Venom movie made almost $1 billion, which only emboldened Sony executives to think that anything, even tangentially related to Spider-Man, would print money for them. But Venom succeeds as a franchise because he actually has his own comic book spin-off series. He is massively popular, and there are tons of great stories from creators that they can draw from to make these films. Honestly, at times, I wish that first Venom movie would have bombed so we would have been spared future setups like this.
I'm not sure how I got here. Has to do with Spider-Man, I think.
What the is this? Are you kidding me?
Then, of course, they gave us Morbius and Madam Web, which, seemed like it was intended to be some multiversal glue between Spider characters, but instead...
And when you take on the responsibility, a great hour will come.
And then, in Venom 2 and No Way Home, it looked like Sony was setting up a true multiversal crossover with the MCU. And then there was that little Venom symbiote left behind at the bar. And then that Venom symbiote was promptly snatched up at the start of this movie, with Venom even saying that he hates the multiverse. I know Matt has some feelings on this we're going to talk about later, but honestly, this is so jarring, and you're leading fans down one path and then ripping them the other direction. It's not fair. But all of that is tame compared to what they did to one of the best Marvel villains, Null. His inclusion in this movie was borderline criminal.
Oh, sorry, person, that's me. Hello? Oh dear. Person, they've been urgently trying to reach me.
Doug, hang up.
My car warranty is expired? Oh, jeez.
Dude, that's a scam call. Hang up.
Oh, well, how did they get my number? I'm just a little dog.
Well, that's the really messed up part, dude. They bought your number legally from online data brokers. See, the internet is filled with shady people who pay big money just for access to your private data. Now, I know this because I used to get a ton of spam phone calls and emails.
Oh, you don't get these kind of calls anymore?
Very rarely, because I signed up for Incogni. They're the sponsor of this video. Incogni is by far one of the best products that we talk about on this channel. This is the app that they don't want you to know about. And you can sign up right now with our link below using the code ScreenCrush to get an exclusive 60% off an annual Incogni plan. You would be shocked how much of your personal information is just out there on the internet, like your address, your phone number, credit history, and medical history. Shady companies can get your info so easy it is scary. Like you may have noticed, you sign up for some loyalty card and suddenly you get bombarded with targeted ads or robocalls. That's because these companies sell your data to giant firms called data brokers, and then they sell your information to all these advertisers. So far, Incogni has found 339 companies that were selling my sensitive information. I'm talking about my financial details, health history, internet search history, and they were selling this info to the highest bidder. They even tell you the dangers associated with these companies, like data leaks, spam calls, and even stalking. It's really scary stuff. But then Incogni contacts those companies on your behalf, and they legally have to remove your information. And then Incogni alerts you when the request has been completed. So far, Incogni has completed 287 removal requests on my behalf, so my personal information is now being suppressed. After signing up, I get almost no spam, and I can't even remember the last time I got a phone call from my old friend, unknown number. So I highly recommend you give Incogni a try. Use my code ScreenCrush with the link below to get an exclusive deal, 60% off an Incogni plan. It is a great deal that you don't want to miss. Now, back to what I was saying. So you may not be familiar with Null from the comics. Essentially, he existed in the proto-universe when all was darkness. Then the Celestials emerged, they created light, and so he went to war with the Celestials, you know, because they woke him up.
You woke me from my nap.
Now, he cuts off a Celestial's head that eventually becomes Nowhere from Guardians of the Galaxy. Null is also the creator of the symbiotes and is a Thanos-level threat in the comics. For long stretches in the Venom comics, he's the character they're trying to stop from escaping his prison, you know, like in this movie. But you know, those are comic books. They're told sequentially over several months and years. They're supposed to have slow builds. The problem with this movie is there's never a payoff for the Null build. Now, eventually, in the comics, Null does escape and comes to Earth. Even with all the other heroes like Spider-Man and the Avengers fighting him, Null easily assimilates them. And then the unlikely hero Eddie Brock is able to defeat Null by essentially becoming him. Eddie becomes the new god of the symbionts. This was a great arc for Eddie Brock, to go from villain to anti-hero to just hero. So this whole movie is also about the threat of Null. He's coming, but then he never actually arrives. It's like Waiting for Godot, but way more boring. Null is a story that should have been truly cosmic. Like in the MCU, he would have fought the Guardians of the Galaxy and turned all the Avengers into symbiote versions of themselves. But in Sony's something to do with Spider-Man, I think universe, he's a CGI dude in a CGI goo scene who essentially exists to bolster the movie's marketing campaign. This is no different than adding Spider-Man to the background in this Morbius trailer. This is a cheap shot that doesn't give a shit about fans, and it's insulting.
So the movie's bad?
I actually don't think this movie's that bad. I think it's like a 6.5 out of 10. But it is not a movie that I would watch in theater. See it on streaming. Maybe then Sony would do right by Venom by introducing him into the actual Spider-Man franchise where he belongs. Now, a little later, I want to talk about Sony's way forward and what I think they should be setting up with Spider-Man 4. But now I want to talk to a guy who really did not like this movie, or at least I don't think he did, Matt Singer. Matt, you know, we talked after we saw the film, haven't got to read your full review yet, but can you just tell us your thoughts on Venom the Last Dance?
Well, I hope the title is accurate. I think my overall impression is very similar, actually, to my feelings about the other two movies. It doesn't seem to matter really like who directs these movies or what they're about. I kind of walk away feeling the same thing, which is Tom Hardy is very good in this role. I enjoy seeing him. I enjoy, the whole concept of Venom as kind of this buddy comedy duo. That they're like buddy cops who don't get along almost, so they're just constantly bickering. I think that's sort of a fun concept to use with the Venom character. In this movie, they almost do like a midnight run kind of a riff on that, because they're like constantly road tripping the whole movie. They start in Mexico, they go to New York for some reason, or at least that's where they want to go, and then they're wandering, they're hitchhiking, they hang out with a hippie family, they wind up in Las Vegas. I mean, it's really scattershot. And I think that's really the problem, is that like in all these movies, I love the main character and I dislike just about everything else around them. The stories feel very disjointed and thrown together and confusing. The villains are very rarely interesting at all. This movie has a ton of villains. They're all kind of disappointing, confusing, convoluted, boring. Yeah, it's just like
Chiwetel Ejiofor is like your standard evil military guy. Screw the country, I want to live. Like it seems like he's that guy from the Iron Giant. Yeah, I couldn't agree more.
Yeah, and that's in some scenes. In other scenes, he seems kind of a nice guy. Like it's almost like they filmed the movie, and I don't know, maybe they did like two different ways with his character. One where he was more of a, like kind of a sidekick to Venom, or at least, more ambiguous, and another where he was like the main bad guy. Because in some scenes, he's like joking with Juno Temple. He seems like her buddy. And in the next scene, he's like, "You don't work here anymore. I'm in charge." And it's like, well, which one is he? I from any moment to another, you don't really know how he's going to react in any scene. But he's not the only villain. It's like you've also got Null, who
I was going to ask you, what were your, I mean, I know you're obviously a huge Spider-Man fan. You wrote the book From Amazing to Spectacular about Spider-Man. Null maybe not be like your favorite Spider-Man villain, but as I talked about, I think this guy has a lot of potential that they just kind of sidelined maybe for the next movie or something. What were your thoughts on the Null exposition opening and him as a looming threat over the film?
It all felt to me like, and again, I don't know anything about the logistics of how the movie was actually made, but it really felt to me like at the 11th hour, someone said, we've got people talking about Null and we've got these monsters chasing people that don't speak and aren't, again, another not very interesting villain, just these generic, snarling monsters. We've got to show more of Null. We've got to explain who he is more. And so you have these kind of like bookends at the beginning and end of the film where you see this character just sitting there. He doesn't look at the camera or even in the direction of the camera. His mouth doesn't move, I don't think. You hear him, but he's not even talking. He's just a guy with white hair sitting on a throne talking about the void and the symbiotes and the codex and all of this nonsense.
And I think Man of Steel kind of wore me out on villains pursuing a codex. That's
at least those villains are like present in the film and doing things and not just sitting in Dimension X and, he can't leave, but he can send his minions wherever they want to go all over the galaxy at any moment's notice.
And apparently Eddie is the only symbiote that has this codex, right? Like, it's the only time a symbiote has died with a host and all that stuff. I want to go back to something you touched on, though, and that is like what I have really enjoyed about these movies. Like, I've been against, like I was saying earlier, I've been against the Venom franchise from the start because I knew it would embolden Sony to make bad movies, and I was proven right. But in that first movie, it's so boring right up until that scene where they first bonded. And then you get this like dynamic between the two. And then you have to remind yourself, this is just Tom Hardy with an earpiece. Those parts of this movie, like the Midnight Run or Road to, where they're on the road and Eddie keeps losing his shoes and he goes to Vegas. That was great. I actually was down for that. But as soon as they got to the lab and we got into the capital P plot, that is when it just ground to a damn halt for me. Were you feeling like any momentum in the story before that? Like, do you feel like maybe a straight up road trip movie to New York would have worked better?
I could see that kind of movie working better because, again, you've established this dynamic, which I agree with you is very likable and very charming. And Tom Hardy is very good at playing both of these characters and playing off of himself. I think he does deserve plenty of credit for how entertaining all three of these movies have been. Because again, to me, it's like he's the only reason to see them in my mind. Like I couldn't recommend anything else really about these movies other than it is fun to watch Tom Hardy be Venom. And when you've got that dynamic, a road trip movie makes some amount of sense. I think, again, the problem is here, as it has been in so many of these movies, is like they are totally at sea. I mean, I really think that the deal between Marvel and Sony that gave us those Tom Holland Spider-Man movies, which are a lot of fun, and I like all of them, it really kind of doomed everything else they're making out of these movies. Because as soon as you put Spider-Man into the MCU, but none of these other movies can be in there, you have created this situation where you have all these Spider-Man quote-unquote spin-offs that have nothing to do with Spider-Man. Spider-Man can never appear in them. The characters in those movies can't appear in any of the MCU Spider-Man movies. And so it's like, well, what purpose do they serve? And so you have a situation like these Venom movies where there's no Spider-Man, like he has nothing to do with this character, whose whole existence was created as this counterpoint to Spider-Man, as this dark doppelganger of Spider-Man, as this,
and he doesn't have the symbol on his chest because maybe that's in violation of his, like, we never got the actual Venom suit that made him so distinct, in
right,
these
but even
movies.
more, absolutely, but even more importantly than that, the whole point of Venom is as this counterpoint to Spider-Man, whether or not they're fighting. The idea of Venom is as, they joke about him being this lethal protector. But that does speak to the concept of the character, whether he's, trying to eat Spider-Man's brains or bad guys' brains. He is sort of this kind of meta commentary on the way that comics in the late 80s into the early 90s were getting darker and darker. And you had a character like Spider-Man who represented this kind of maybe not happier or sunnier attitude, but at least this commitment to being like, do no harm. Be a little bit more of a conventional do-gooder, with great power comes great responsibility hero, right? So when you remove that, I'm not saying Venom can't work without Spider-Man. Obviously, they've made many, many Venom comics throughout the years.
Great Venom comics.
Sure.
Dive into Eddie as a character, yeah.
But you need to come up with something to replace that. And other than the whole buddy dynamic, I don't think these movies ever really did. And at the same time, they're struggling so hard to constantly juggle sort of teasing making a universe, sort of not. The whole opening of this movie replays the post-credit scene from, I guess, Spider-Man No Way Home, which was, they teased you with Venom's going, with, I guess, the second Venom movie teased, well, now he's finally going to meet Spider-Man, and fans everywhere are jumping for joy. And then what do they do in that next post-credit scene? Whoop! Just kidding. They yanked him back to the Sony universe. And, they left behind one little glob of the Venom goo to kind of like give you some sort of hope that, okay, well, Tom Hardy's Venom, he's not going to meet Spider-Man. But the Venom symbiote, they left that behind. Okay, maybe that's something to look forward to, maybe. And then what do they do in this movie, Ryan? They basically retcon that and get rid of it.
Immediately. Right. In the trailer, they did it.
Right.
They got rid of that.
Now
that
little
all hopes.
Now that little goober of Venom that was left behind in the MCU. Oh, actually, that was in, again, the Sony universe. And it just constantly feels like they're trying desperately to like glom on to the MCU in any way they can. And time and again, they're sort of like being, like they're walking up to that line. And then I don't know if it's literally Marvel saying, no, you can't do that. Or they know all along they can't. And they're literally doing this in a deliberate attempt to mislead you. But that's the vibe you get from these movies. It's like,
in the case of the Morbius trailer, that's what it was. They put Spider-Man 1 artwork behind Morbius, and then they tacked on that post-credit scene. I don't think they're actually allowed to show Spider-Man in any of these films, which is why Madam Web, he's in utero the whole time. They don't even say the name Peter Parker.
Right. So this is a very long-winded way of answering your question about, could a road trip movie work? I mean, yes, I think it could, but I think there's such fundamental problems with this movie, this whole franchise, and all of these Spider-Man. I always want to use air quotes, spin-off movies. How do you spin off a movie where the characters didn't appear in the thing that they're supposedly spun off from. They can't really refer back to those movies. The characters can't go from one to the other. It's like just a total creative nightmare, because like it's like a Faustian bargain. It's like Mephisto was involved here. It's like, okay, the good news is you're going to get some really good Spider-Man movies. Spider-Man is in the MCU. He gets to interact with the Avengers. He has, you have a great cast in those movies. Those movies are fun. They all work. The downside is we're going to keep making these other movies that aren't very good, that don't connect, and we're just going to keep making them and making them and we still have Craven, and who knows what happens after that. It's just, it's really exhausting. And again, even when they have someone like Tom Hardy, who is a good actor, who is good in these movies, he just seems so, he's straitjacketed here by what he is like legally allowed to do and say and interact with. And it just, like, why make 3 Venom movies if the character is never going to meet Spider-Man, is never going to have anything to do with him? Again, other than obviously, the first one made a lot of money. We're going to keep making them. And yeah, Tom Hardy is good, but it's like, I really think this was a franchise for 3 movies now that was a really great central performance in search of any other reason to exist. I still don't think they found it.
No, and I couldn't agree more. And like I want to talk in just a little bit about like Null, and I think maybe do this in a future video about how Null seems like he's being set up as maybe a big bad villain over their big sprawling franchise. But Matt, I want to thank you for joining me. You can find Matt Singer's review for Venom the Last Dance on ScreenCrush.com. And Matt, of course, is the author of Spider-Man, From Amazing to Spectacular, a really great book, as well as other books that you can find links to on his socials. Matt, thanks for joining me. Now, I do want to talk about what I think is next for Sony and what the heck they could possibly be setting up here. Now, I do wonder what Sony is actually trying to do here. It seemed like in the post-credit scene of No Way Home that they were trying to put Venom in the MCU. But then they not only retconned this immediately in this movie by showing that all of that goo on the bar stuff happens in the Venom universe, but then they also audibly say, we hate the multiverse. And then the movie ends with that Null post-credit scene that implies that he will return. But this is supposed to be Tom Hardy's last movie as Venom. So I don't think that Sony is like pumping the brakes anytime soon. I do think that the Venom symbiote survived and it's going to bond with another one of its hosts from the comics, like war veteran Flash Thompson. And then I think that Null will still come to Earth, or multiple Earths, to threaten multiple dimensions. Basically, whatever franchise actually succeed for Sony. Like if Craven does well at the box office, maybe they'll just say screw it and make their Sinister Six movie where all the villains fight Null or something. I think that Sony is desperate to have a franchise, which is why we're getting these schlocky, nostalgia-bait Ghostbusters movies and these like half Spider-Man movies like Venom the Last Dance. And guys, this sucks because all of these heroes and villains really do belong in the MCU, where Marvel Studios can take their time and build out a proper franchise. Like I hope there's a scenario where Sony will sell the rights back to Marvel or like lease them for 100 years or something like that. But I doubt it. I think we're going to get a new Venom reboot very soon, and this will not be the end of our suffering. But just a reminder, guys, we are going on tour to 11 cities starting on November 14th in Boston. We're going to go behind the scenes of our videos, do trivia, live talkbacks, show you the things that we can't show on YouTube. It's going to be a lot of fun. The links are below. So, what did you think of Venom the Last Dance? What do you think about the Venom franchise and the Something to Do with Spider-Man I Think franchise? Let me know your thoughts down in the comments below or at me on Twitter. And if it's your first time here, welcome to the channel. Please subscribe and smash that bell for alerts. For ScreenCrush, I'm Ryan Airy.